TopMedTalk.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk. We're at the ANZCA, the Australian New Zealand College of Anaesthetists and Faculty of Pain Medicine annual scientific meeting in Sydney, Australia. I'm Desiree, Chappell, your host. I'm joined by my co-host, Monty, Mythen, who's actually on the grounds. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, joining virtually. Monty, how is it there in Sydney?
It is wonderful. We're having a great time. You can hear all the noise and chatter in the background. Australians and New Zealand folks are made of different stuff. You know, it's early on a Sunday morning and they're doing science. Meanwhile, you've been to the Kentucky Derby. But that's,
Yep, it's true. It was the 149th running of the Kentucky Derby. Spoiler alert, if you haven't heard, Mage, number 8 horse, won today. It was a fantastic race. And Louisville is a bit of a party town right now, I do have to say. But it sounds like you guys are having more fun there in Sydney at the meeting. It sounds like a fantastic time.
And we're here because of the generosity of ANZCA, the Australian New Zealand College of Anaesthetists and Faculty of Pain Medicine, with some sponsorship from 3M, but also because of our first guest we're going to introduce, Stefan, who very kindly came up with this idea that in a meeting that's called Be Connected, that he would reach out and say, would TopMedTalk be prepared to play along? So, Stefan, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good. If you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us a bit more about yourself in a main conversation.
Of course. I'm Stefan Dieleman. I'm a Dutch anaesthetist, trained and sort of grown up in the Netherlands in anaesthesia, and then decided to have a little outing to Australia for fellowship 10, 11 years ago with Paul Miles in Melbourne. Left and went back to the Netherlands, but sort of regretted it. And decided to come back. So we've been here for almost 5 years now. So I've got a job at Westmead now, Westmead Hospital in Sydney, as the head of research, so sort of combining my clinical time and research there. And somehow put my hand up to organise this meeting 2 years ago, which everyone said I was crazy for doing, but I'm enjoying every minute of it. It's been a really good experience.
And Be Connected as the theme, because I think it's the first sort of post-COVID mass gathering, isn't it?
Yes, so the last ANZCA meeting in person was actually outside Australia in Kuala Lumpur in 2019. It's always in May, and obviously got cancelled in 2020. There was a hybrid version 2021, and again a fully virtual version last year. So this is the very first one where everyone's actually able to connect again in person. And we thought the theme would be very suitable for where we're heading to as a specialty, as a much more multidisciplinary specialty with perioperative medicine developing, with our diploma of perioperative medicine coming online very soon as well. So we thought it would be a very fitting theme for this meeting.
And it feels like there's a lot of people here. There was a lot. There was a big
so we've got
award ceremony last night, and it was packed.
It was packed. I think there's just under 2,000 in-person attendees, and we've got a couple of hundred virtual attendees as well. Well over 2,000 people, which is a really good turnout. And everyone just seems to be excited to be here and to be able to meet up again with everyone else.
And now our second guest, Professor Andrew Davidson. Andrew, if I may, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm actually a paediatric anaesthetist from the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, but I'm also the director of the Melbourne Children's Trial Centre, and I'm currently the chair of the College of Anaesthetists Clinical Trials Network.
So let's dive straight into that in the interest of time, because I know that you both need to get away quite quickly to go to the main stage. Andrew, why don't you start? Clinical Trials Networks, what are they all about?
They usually start with a bunch of anaesthetists or any craft group that want to do a trial together. And once they succeed in doing their first trial, they usually think, well, let's do another trial. And then gradually they build up a network of like-minded trialists.
And these are the like-minded trialists can include the people who design and come up with how the trial might look, but possibly more importantly, the people who deliver the trial, who recruit the patients.
Yes, right? As the network gets larger and more sophisticated, then you recruit more sites, you involve more people, and what tends to happen is an increasing interest in actually supporting the coordinators who are actually doing the recruiting at all the sites.
And can you give an example or two of some trials that have been completed by the network?
Oh, there's numerous. There's one recent one, which was the Paediatrics trial, looking at dexamethasone and post-operative wound infection. Then there have been trials looking at liberal versus restricted fluids, different depths of anaesthesia and outcome.
and they tend to be large, and the word pragmatic is used, so efficiently delivered by a network of enthusiasts.
Yes, they tend to be large, hence the need for the network.
Yes.
And to some extent, in trials, big is always better than small. Pragmatic, they need to be doable, so you can't have anything that's too complex or demands too much of people, because you've got to involve multiple sites and have lots of people who are enthusiastic about being part of the trial.
Right. Stefan, the session is entitled Clinical Trial Networks in Europe and Australasia. That's a lot of places.
Yes.
So expand on that for us.
Well, I think ANZCA and the ANZCA CTN really tries to work beyond Australia and New Zealand. I think the core of the centres are here, but Hong Kong, for example, has been one of the countries that's always been heavily involved through Matthew Chen as one of the main investigators there. So I think the CTN always tries to expand beyond Australia, and there's a lot of centres in the UK for a number of our studies as well. And in addition to that, I mean, coming from Europe, where trials were sort of traditionally done on a sort of country basis, on a national basis, it's good to see that the trial network is developing there as well, led by the ESAIC, where an increasing number of centres are getting involved in large European broad trials, and they've completed one or two big trials in the last few years, and there's quite a few up and running. So I think ANZCA has been leading, or Australia has been leading in terms of big clinical trial networks in anaesthesia, but I think Europe is getting there as well, which is really good to see.
So one of the challenges in the trials and working through different countries is sometimes cultural issues come to play, particularly with regards to how anaesthesia is delivered, whether it's a devolved model or a physician-led, physician-delivered model. Do you see any variability in the different countries, or does the network tend to form of like-minded people?
Partly it does, I think. So it does recruit centres that would feel like they can contribute and they can adhere to the study protocol. But I think because of the pragmatic nature of most of the studies, that variability is not very important. And I think we've successfully recruited centres across the world without too much trouble, without having to change the protocol, for example, for different countries. So I think the pragmatic nature just makes that happen.
But you've got to do your homework first and really get the buy-in from all the sites that you're intending to include. And so it doesn't really work if you go in there in a very top-down way and say, this is what we're going to do, you follow us. A good network really reaches out to all those who are likely to participate so that they have buy-in to the question. But having said that, you always come up with surprises and find that places are unexpectedly different or doing weird things.
Or won't follow the protocol seems to be something we're experiencing in some places.
It's easier if you make the protocol pretty simple and idiot-proof.
So if we take, because myself and Desiree on a number of occasions have had reason to discuss the relief trial and put it in the context of fluid restriction seems to still be very common in some certain parts of the world, despite a very large trial that implies the fact that that's the wrong way round, that moderately liberal is probably better. Tell us, in the development of the relief trial, can you tell us a little bit about the steps? The establishing feasibility, getting signal separation,
It's for any trial, first of all, you have to figure out that it's a question that people are actually interested in answering. You then link to that, you've got to think, what is the impact you want to make? And do you want people to change all their fluids all the time, or just some of them? So you go back, what is the impact you want to make? What is the question? Then you socialise the question amongst all those that can sort of tear it apart and find issues with the question. Then move forward to actually collect the pilot data of what do people currently do, what you're likely to see. And it's about a year from idea to when you actually start the trial. But that's a year very well spent. And
in part of that, Stefan, is we talk about equipoise.
Yes.
In other words, the willingness to randomise people to either group, even if it doesn't fit with one's personal bias or prejudice.
Yeah, and that's the thing that requires a lot of sort of groundwork, as Andrew said. You need to be aware of what's normal and what's accepted and what's routine practice, and if that routine practice is variable enough to allow for randomization between treatment A or treatment B, for example. And I think, in my own experience, you're always going to get centers that say, well, we're really, really strong believers in one of the treatment arms, and we're just not comfortable randomizing. And I think you accept that, and that's accept that the trial's not going to work in that center.
Yeah. But they need to rule themselves out if they don't have
the equipoise. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a very important thing to find out early.
And that needs to be with all the practitioners involved. So if it's
so you can't just have one investigator saying, I'm happy to do this, but if there's 10 other clinicians who are not willing to do that randomization, this is not going to work.
So Desiree, from the United States perspective, we've been discussing recently at the International Anaesthesia Research Society that fluid restriction, despite the results of the relief trial, suggesting that being moderately liberal is probably better for the patients, seems to be mainstream in the USA. So, it's hard to generalise for our massive country, but we've talked to lots of people in lots of centres, and they routinely fluid restrict and seem to be immune to high-quality evidence published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It wasn't published in the Australian Journal of Medicine, if you see what I mean. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. What do you make of that, Desiree? What's the point in doing all these big trials if people aren't listening?
Well, it's true, Monty. As the gentlemen have been speaking, lots of questions come up for me. The U.S. doesn't seem to be involved in this network trial. We have our own challenges here in the U.S., and I don't know if this translates to other countries, but we have a system that is an academic system versus a private practice system. And actually, we do more surgery in a private practice setting, but most of the research seems to be done in academia. So there's a little bit of a little dichotomy there of how that can actually translate into what most of us do. And I'm a private practice anesthesia provider. What we do, so I think there's a little bit of that. So I'd be curious to hear about that. But I think when it comes to specifically fluid restriction, Monty, we've talked a lot about this. For us in anesthesia, it took a while for us to really kind of jump on board for enhanced recovery after surgery and a protocolized approach to care. We did, and in those protocols, fluid restriction was the kind of the main frame for hemodynamic management, and fluid management was just to fluid restrict. And I think that terminology kind of got into our literature, it got into the surgeon's literature, and so that's kind of where we're stuck right now, even though there's been the relief trial and plenty of other trials now that have come out that have shown the benefit of being moderately liberal and goal-directed fluid therapy. So I think we're fighting a couple different battles here in the U.S. that makes it difficult really to translate kind of what's being done across the globe into what we can do practically here in the U.S. And I'd love Stefan and Andrew's perspective on this about how we can take what you guys are doing and put it into practice here, because it's complicated at best, but we do have our challenges.
So I know we have to let you go in a second, gentlemen. So dealing specifically with that briefly, where you work, have you seen the trials that you've done successfully convert into change in practice, or is there still resistance in some places? Stefan first.
Andrew mainly works in paediatrics, so I'm not sure if that's different, but especially in the adult hospitals, I think the trials that the network does are very well known across Australia. And they're obviously we're well presented in conferences like this, and people tend to
change practice
because they're good quality studies, and it's quite convincing usually.
Andrew?
It depends on how much you do your homework. There's a perception that you have to translate, you do the trial and then you translate your results into change of practice. But that doesn't work unless you're asking a question that people want to know. Yeah. So you need to do all your translation before you start the trial. And if you do that, then you can change practice. But if you ignore what people, if they say, well, I don't care what the trial shows, I'm just not going to change my practice, then you've got a problem. So you really need to socialise the trial beforehand to make sure It's a question that people are actually going to act on. And there's a little bit of people think, oh, you do the trial, you must change practice. It's not quite as simple as that. Trials provide very strong evidence, but they are nuanced.
Nuanced, okay. So in closing, what's coming down the pipeline, or are there trials that people can put their hand up and join in with? And where should they look to find out that information?
They can certainly go to the ANZCA website, where we've just recently loaded up all the trials that we've done and the trials that we now have endorsed. Or you can just reach out to any of the members of the network here and say, I've got an interesting idea, or I want to be involved.
And if there's the trials people can get involved in at the moment?
Well, there's numerous trials, but I think the big ones just starting are the Lollipop trial, which looks at lignocaine in breast surgery and chronic pain. The Calypso trial, which is cardiac surgery and the different dosing of antibiotics and the risk of infection. And the TREAKS trial, which is tranexamic acid in gastrointestinal surgery and the risk of infection together.
Yes.
And the SNAP trial looking at Sagamadex versus neostigmine.
And anyone anywhere can potentially put their hand up and say, we'd love, if it works out, to try and accrue patients to these studies. There's obviously a few processes, but...
It's encourage that, because you never know which sites are going to be golden.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Well, gentlemen, I know you both need to get on to go to the main stage and do some podium activities. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Desiree, thank you for joining in. I'm going to do a very brief close here and just say thank you once again to ANZCA and to 3M for their sponsorship. We're having a wonderful time here. We will be back soon with opioids, clinician versus patient expectations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
TopMedTalk.
Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.